Okay.
No, this is my first time seeing this form.
This is the first time. Okay, good to know. So the single party compensation agreement, better known as the SP form, is a form utilized when you have a buyer and a seller, but you don't have it listed. Okay. You don't have this property listed, or the property is not listed. It's an off market transaction. So I get this quite often. I have a seller that wants to sell the property. I have a buyer that wants to buy the property, but there is no listing. It's not on the MLS. It's not at any third-party websites, but we have a buyer and seller that want to sell a property, right? And the buyer that wants to buy the property. So in these specific circumstances, this is the form that will allow you to navigate the transaction. It's a pretty self-explanatory form, but it goes into the ins and outs and how you can navigate and offer open escrow and ultimately get paid a commission. So the purpose of this agreement ensures compensation to the broker when a transaction occurs with a specific buyer. The key point is, as most of the forms, right? All commissions are not fixed by law. They're set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between the principal, right? So the principal could be two elements, right? The buyer or the seller, okay? You start off with the date of preparation. That's the date that you actually start working on the document. That's not the date necessarily where you're going to have signatures, but when you actually start creating the actual form, right? So that's going to be here. Next is the principal, right? You are going to have a transaction. That could be, again, an avenue and how you navigate this, but most likely, if you scroll all the way down, okay, this section here, okay, it doesn't say necessarily seller, it says principal, right? So, because the seller may want to sell the property, but it may not want to list it, okay? And maybe it's a specific buyer that that the seller is willing to entertain your offer. And if this buyer doesn't come through, you don't have a listing agreement, then the deal basically terminates. So this is just a one pager documentation that you are in the middle navigating this transaction with the intent of closing and with the intent to get compensated for services rendered. Okay. Principal is going to be the seller's information, and the broker is obviously going to be Keller Williams. Agrees with the following real property, right? I just use this as an example, but you're going to put the city, the county, and then the address, right? So let's go with seller here, right? And Keller Williams here. Okay. And that's in the county of Los Angeles, right? Now you just have the first part of the document completed. Then it goes into part one, the compensation. As we said, this is what you're going to negotiate terms, right? These are terms. Now, let's just say, for the sake of today's class, you represent a buyer, okay? You're going to have a buyer representation agreement, the BRBC, right? So now you have locked in that agreement with the buyer, right? You happen to be prospecting, door knocking, farming your neighborhood, and you come across a seller that says, well, if you bring me a buyer, I'll consider in selling the property. but I don't want to list. But if you bring me a qualified buyer who's willing to pay me what I want for the house, I may consider of selling the property. Okay, so then you go back to your database, you start making calls saying, hey, I have a potential off-market transaction that I can provide you if you're interested. I'm interested. I'm interested in the city. I'm interested. All right. You already kind of know the ins and outs, right, of what the seller's willing to sell the property. Let's just say for the sake of class today, right, it's $1 million, right? You're still going to do a purchase agreement, an RPA, right? But this just gives you an avenue of why it's called a single party compensation agreement when there is no listing agent involved or no listing agreement involved, right? You have a seller, you have a buyer, you have a property. Okay, now it goes into the principal agrees to pay the agency relationship in amount of a percentage. In this case, you're going to put the percentage that you're asking, right? So here you put, let's just say for the sake of class, 3%, or you can put the terms of the lease, okay, if there's a different number there. 1A goes into if principal enters into an agreement with, okay, other parties, then that's where you're going to put that information. Okay, right here. To purchase, sell, or exchange the property during the period commencing on date and expiring on date at 11:59 p.m. So meaning is, look, when you're creating this particular form, the intent is, again, it's not a listing agreement, right? Because you don't have a listing sign that immediately you're going to put it on the MLS. You're going to go and take photography. You're going to get it all ready with description. You just got a seller that says, yeah, if I meet the buyer, I'll consider selling. This section here gives you a parameter that will allow you and the seller a specific time to get this deal. Typically, you already have the buyer and you already have the seller in place. So you may want to do a 30-day period here. So the date of commencing date would be, let's just say today, as an example, and then ending up, say, on the 5th of November. Okay. So what this means is if you, the buyer and the seller, can come to an agreement and the offer gets accepted, then you are, based on this information so far, allowed to get paid compensation of 3%. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because you have a specific time and an expiration date that if we can make this work between that time frame, then I'm entitled to compensation.
So Simon?
Yes.
Let me ask you a question. This is something that comes before a purchase agreement as you're trying to negotiate a purchase agreement, or is this slapped on the top of the purchase agreement and everything's signed at the same time?
This is at the same time.
Okay.
When you submit an offer to the seller, you're also submitting this as a request, because remember, you don't have a listing agreement. Right. There is no listing agent involved. This is a seller that says it's more like a for sale by owner. All right, you got a for sale by owner, and this for sale by owner is willing to sell it, right? But you don't have a listing agreement, so there's no compensation. Mm-hmm. Because you didn't have agreement between the seller when you did a traditional listing presentation, right? This is a clean transaction where you have a seller that if you bring me the right buyer at the right price, terms and conditions, I'll consider selling the property. But under no obligations is if that buyer doesn't perform and we end up canceling, you don't have any ties to this. We clean our hand and we're done. You move on, I move on. This is this one that utilizes that specific position. Okay. Now, if you have a listing agreement, that's a total different situation, right? That's when you have a listing agreement. But in this instance, that's not the case with this single party compensation. This is just an agreement, right? You're prospecting a neighborhood, you're door knocking a seller, potential seller opens the door, you introduce yourself, hi, my name is Simon with Keller Williams. You know, we have buyers that are looking to move into the neighborhood. I'm just curiosity, you know, have you been considering possibly selling your home? I haven't put too much thought on that. Wonderful. Well, what brought you into this neighborhood? Well, job, right? My job. Okay, if you were to sell this home, where will you move next? Well, you know what? I'm going to be retiring. We're thinking of packing, leaving California, and moving to Washington. Fantastic. If I can find a ready, willing, and able buyer that hits all the bells and whistles, will you entertain an offer? Yeah, but I don't want to list anything. But if you bring me a buyer, I may consider. Then you go through your process of identifying the buyer, right? And you can say to the buyer, look, I have a off-market potential that if you are interested, I can provide you the address, but under one circumstance, that you sign an agreement with me. And if you like the property, right, then you will allow me to represent you in the submission of the offer. Okay. And we can put it where it's only this specific property, meaning that I'll have a BRBC agreement with this buyer on this property only. And if the deal doesn't go through, the buyer can walk away and be on its way, right? They can go work with another agent. So you can be very specific too, but it also gives you that upper advantage when you're working with a seller, okay? So now we have established what you're asking for compensation. You have established already, you know, that the property is during this commencing period, right? Give me the time, right? Give me the time to get this deal closed. Now, this is not an agreement that I'm going to try to fish for a buyer. Let me try to find a buyer. And if I find it, let me put this in writing. No. This is when you already have a ready, willing, and able buyer that is ready to submit an offer. You're going to attach the single party compensation because you're asking the you're asking the seller to pay you compensation. That's all you're doing. Okay. Because technically speaking, right, you usually, if you're working with a buyer, have a listing agent that's representing the seller. But in this case, there is no agent. It's a for sale by owner. It's a consumer that says to you, and how many times have you gone on objection conversations? Well, you know, I'll only sell if I get the right price, but I'm not going to give you the listing. Okay, I get it. So now I want you to think a little different in how you navigate this conversation, because this gives an opportunity for you to put deals together without actually going through the process of getting the listing signed and executed, getting a professional photographer to go out there and start taking photos, putting it on the MLS, right, and start putting all of the information and hoping and wait to see if a buyer or offers come in. This is, again, a deal that is already here, ready to happen. You got all of the key players ready. You have the seller ready to sell. You got the buyer ready to buy. Make sense? Questions, thoughts, or concerns so far? Okay, I think that I have someone. Let's see, someone in chat. If you're working with a buyer and they refuse to sign a BRBC, can this substitute for a BRBC on a specific property? Absolutely. Yeah. So let's just say that the buyer does not want to be represented, right? Okay, and that's perfectly fine. You can be the middleman in this transaction. You don't have a listing agreement, so you don't have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller. And if the buyer doesn't want to sign a BRBC, you don't have a fiduciary responsibility for the buyer. So you're right in the middle. You're on that fine line, right? You don't have no representation to either. But you are willing to put the connection, right? You found the seller that's motivated to sell. You got a buyer that's interested in buying. You can be the middle front man or woman navigating the paperwork, okay? And still get paid a commission just to do paperwork Because the seller may not want you to list the property or have an exclusive or have representation. Or the buyer in this case, what if the buyer refuses to sign a BRBC? Then you're just doing the paperwork. You're facilitating paperwork for two individuals if they want to go in that direction, and you can get paid for that. Well, Simon, wait a minute. I thought we had to have an exclusive listing agreement or at least a buyer representation agreement. No, not at all. Think about it for a minute. Look at the listing agreement, right? The listing agreement says two things, right? One, it says what compensation you're going to get paid if you list their home. Then there's another section that talks about unrepresented buyers, right? Meaning that you have no ties with this buyer, but they're willing to submit an offer without representation. We don't want to go in that direction, but the buyer may be a very sophisticated, very savvy, maybe an investor that knows contracts, knows has been through that process, doesn't need representation, wants the property, and because you made this deal happen, the buyer wouldn't have known of the seller and this particular property. You're the middle person handling this transaction. Again, you don't have a listing agreement. You don't have a buyer representation agreement. You could still facilitate this, navigate this, and prepare the documentation, right? That's perfectly fine. Yes, sir.
In the purchase agreement, are you representing the buyer or seller, and is there a commission stated in the purchase agreement?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So to answer your question, it really depends. Because the intent is, let's say you're prospecting, right? As I mentioned earlier, you're door knocking and you find someone that's interested in selling the property. Now you're going to go back to your database and start calling people. Hey, I remember that you were looking for a property in Cascade area. Are you still interested? Yeah. What do you got? Well, I got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet on a 58 lot site. The home was built in 1970. The seller has done, a lot of upgrades. Property is currently what he wants is $1 million. Okay. You're interested? Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested. Okay. So the whole hook is obviously you want to have that representation from the buyer, right? Because if you don't, let's just say that buyer gets another agent, right? This is why you want to lock. I will not be able to provide you any information on the property until you have some type of agreement with me. It doesn't mean that I have to represent you in other properties. It can be that, I represent you only on this particular property, and that's it. If you don't end up buying or the seller doesn't sell, or we cannot come to some type of agreement, the deal, we rip the contract and you on your way. Okay, does that hopefully answer your question?
Not really.
Okay.
I'm just curious, you said this is supposed to go with the purchase agreement, right? At
Right.
the same time,
Right,
on that purchase agreement, would you be is your name on it?
absolutely.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're representing one of the, or both of the parties.
You're-
It's the purchase agreement.
You're not representing, okay, remember. As you said on the question. What if the buyer refuses to sign an agreement with you?
I get it.
Okay. What if the seller doesn't want you to list their property? Okay. So where does that leave you? I'm asking, where does that leave you? But they want to sell
Yes,
and they want you to do the paperwork.
Okay.
Okay.
on that paperwork, am I representing somebody on the paperwork?
No,
Oh, okay.
you're just facilitating paperwork. So you're going to put some type of language in there, right? And this is just one of those very unique scenarios, right? Most likely you'll get the buyer to sign an exclusive agreement.
Right, no.
Okay. Most times you're going to be able to get the buyer to sign a BRBC. But on those instances where they refuse, which is perfectly fine, you can still navigate an agreement. We encourage you, obviously, to try to get some agreement signed to represent one or the other party. Because that now puts you in a position that if you represent the buyer, you're going to fight hard for the buyer, not necessarily for the seller, or vice versa. Because even the single party compensation can ultimately become a listing. Because you did such a great job in navigating this, the seller and the buyer don't come to some agreement, the deal falls apart, right? But the seller says, look, you know what? You did such an amazing job. I still need to sell the property. Why don't you go ahead and list the property? Then now you flip it and say, okay, yeah, not a problem. Minimum is a 6-month listing agreement. Here's an exclusive listing agreement. My compensation will still stay the same at the 3%, and you go through the motions. It'll be put on the MLS. It'll be seen by thousands of agents and consumers. You do the song and dance, right? But to answer you can push paper and be just doing the paperwork. You're going to put disclaimers that you do not represent the buyer, you do not represent the seller, you're just doing the paperwork. And you get paid for doing so. Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah. Perfect, right? The listing agreement already says an unrepresented buyer. So imagine if you can do an unrepresented buyer, you can also do an unrepresented seller. This form is attached to your offer saying, we make the deal here happen if the buyer comes through, the seller comes through, the property is good, we can close the deal, you get paid a commission. You don't have a listing, you may not even have a buyer representation agreement, you were just there pushing everyone throughout the steps.
Okay.
And then questions I always get is, well, what if they ask these questions? Okay, well, I'm not your agent. Unfortunately, you may want to, get some legal advice and speak with an attorney. And that's perfectly fine to do so, folks, because you don't have any representation. Okay. Now, the other question I get is, well, if all information is here to say that we are not entangled in a potential litigation. Well, yeah, if anything has your contact information, Keller Williams, your name, of course, you may get dragged to a litigation. There's no way to stop that, right? But our defense is we didn't have any representation agreement with either party. We just were there doing the paperwork as instructed. I've advised both parties to seek legal advice with any questions regarding contingencies, any paragraphs, because I don't have any obligations. That's simple. Okay. Now, the bigger picture, right? The bigger picture is obviously trying to secure the listing, try to get a buyer to sign a buyer representation agreement and go through the proper channels to secure a representation with either or both, right? Because on this same scenario, both may come to an agreement that they do want representation. Now that creates dual agency. Dual agency. It also creates non-representation for both buyer and seller if they choose not to have any representation. They just want you to do the paperwork and still get paid compensation. And you can get paid because remember, it says right here, real estate commissions is not fixed by law. They are set by each what? Broker individually and may be negotiable. Okay. Yes,
Does this apply the same basic rules for investment properties too?
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah. Investment properties, anything and everything. Yeah, absolutely.
that's what I was.
All right, section 1B. Other parties include any person, entity related to other parties or who in any manner act in others parties' behalf, including if the other party is a corporation, limited liability company, partnership, and person or entity that answers investment properties. Okay. Principal hereby assigns the broker the above compensation for principal funds and proceeds in escrow. So it's already giving illustration that we are going to be compensated for services rendered, right? Depending if we have an agreement or not have an agreement, all right? But in these situations, I can tell you from looking at it from two standpoints, and from looking at it from a broker standpoint as well. I've seen most of the single party compensation agreements where you have representation from the buyer. Okay, most of the time. Now, what if this situation happens where you have a property, the seller does not want to list the property, and then you hit your database and another agent says, hey, I got a buyer, right? I have a buyer that is interested in this particular area. Can you provide me with the address? You don't have a listing agreement in place, but you've been promoting it that you have a off-market potential deal here. But then you have an agent that may have a buyer. What do you do in that situation scenario? Anyone on Zoom? That can happen, right? The intent is for you to have the buyer and have the seller, but what if that situation is you go and hit your database and an agent in your database reaches out saying, oh, maybe this buyer that wanted it now changes a different agent, is not your agent, and they bring it to their attention and that agent reaches out to you, right? How do you handle that situation? Does that make sense? Am I being clear on that?
Yeah.
Okay, because it could happen.
That other agent.
Remember, you know, this is attached to an offer. And as the minute that you're divulging off-market potentials, you're exposing it to basically anyone to reach out to you. Now, I asked you this question because I want you to think a little bit and how you navigate it. You don't have a listing agreement, you don't have a buyer, but you have a property. How can you navigate that? Well, you're not going to get compensated, right? Because you're not the one submitting this, but you got an agent inquiring about this specific property. Are you going to say, no, I can't give you that information, you're a real estate agent? No, because then that's an unethical practice, right? You're sending out, potential opportunities. It's open to anyone. It just happened to be an agent that inquired. Well, you're setting yourself for that opportunity for someone to bring a buyer to the seller, because you can't say I cannot provide you that information, because that person can file a complaint against you this quick. Okay, so the way you can navigate this is a couple things, right? You can say to the agent, to the seller, says, look, I happen to find someone that's interested. Okay. But that individual has their own real estate agent. Because the whole purpose of this is that sellers usually don't want to pay compensation. This is your typical for sale by owner. And in most cases, you may not get the seller to pay you compensation, right? So who would be responsible to pay you compensation? The buyer, right? That's why you want to get a BRBC. And if neither is going to give you any compensation, let's go in that rabbit hole for a bit. Okay? You have a property that someone wants to sell, but they don't want to pay a commission, but they'll sell it for the right price, terms, and condition, right? You got a buyer that wants to buy the property, but doesn't want to pay you compensation. How do you handle that? What's the angle of attack if that situation happens? Because it may happen, right? Sometimes you can't win the lotto, right? You can try to win the lotto, but what's the likelihood that you're going to win the jackpot? Think about that for a minute, right? The minute that you're exposing an opportunity, you're going to get people that are going to inquire, and you may lose this deal. And the seller may go after and sell it to someone else, and you may be out of it, and there's nothing you can do with that. You got to understand that as well. The minute that you're exposing, this is why you want to get a listing agreement executed, because then it's guaranteed that you're going to get compensated one way or another. Does that make sense? Otherwise, you're opening up an opportunity for you not to get paid compensation. And I just want to be crystal clear with that. That can happen too as well. Okay. Where did I leave off?
Simon, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, this agreement that you have filled out here, isn't the seller is the one committing to pay you?
Yes.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
if the other agent, if the buyer you're considering has an agent, isn't the seller still obligated to pay you? You're bringing them a buyer, whether they have a agent already, you brought the buyer to them. And isn't the buyer the person that needs to pay that agent, her own agent?
Well, and you gotta look at it from, and that's a good point. The question here is, you brought this deal, right? And let's say that this deal is brought to an agent and that agent has a buyer. The question here is, can you collect compensation for putting a deal together that doesn't involve you? Well, think about this for a minute, right? This agreement is for you to collect compensation when you're submitting an offer. That means you submit an offer, right? Or have someone that is willing to submit an offer that you're going to be involved in. Because if another agent submits an offer directly to the seller, you have no stand on this, no ground, folks. The minute you give that address, it's open to anyone. Because you don't have an agreement in place, you cannot really say you have to pay me compensation. That agent and that buyer can go directly to the seller, or like the seller and says, hey, I heard that you are considering and selling your property, right? Then what? You're going to say to that agent, well, you owe me compensation. No, I don't. Do you have a listing agreement? I didn't see it on the listing or the MLS. Show me proof. That's where it can go sideways, right? Remember, it's the person that has the most evidence. Now, going back to your question regarding this, right? Well, I should be entitled to be paid compensation if I was the one that made this deal happen in the first place. Well, I get it, but when you submit this, you're submitting on your behalf with your information with a purchase agreement. Now, you may split the difference with that other agent and says, look, I can provide you the information, but if the deal happens, I want to get paid a referral. If you're willing to pay me a referral, then by all means, I can divulge that information to you. That happens quite often. I'll give you an example. Again, going back to the door knocking, right? Door knocking, hitting, 48 doors, the 49th door, seller opens, or the homeowner opens and says, yeah, okay, I'll consider. I don't want to list my home, but I'll consider selling if you bring me a buyer. Then you go start sending out text messages, calling people, hey, I have a property off market if you're interested. Okay, and let's just say one of those is a real estate agent. Hey, this is John Smith with AB Realty. I heard that you have a off-market transaction, right? Or excuse me, an off-market deal. Well, you don't want to give that information, right? Because you don't have a listing agreement in place in the first place. So they can go directly to the seller, door knock the seller and says, hey, here's an offer. And that could happen. So how do you avoid that situation? The way you avoid it is, look, before I can provide you the address of the property, the only thing I'm asking, if you have a buyer that I, get a referral out of it. If that buyer buys the property, you close with that, I'm expected 25%. And if you're willing to sign a referral agreement, then I can definitely provide you the address. Okay, now the buyer, hold that thought, Karina. That buyer and that agent, now, once they sign a referral agreement, you're going to divulge that information and any contact information to the seller because, again, you don't have the buyer, another agent does. They're going to try to submit an agreement, right? And that agent may get compensated from the buyer, compensated from the seller, or may get compensated from both. The buyer and the seller can pay the commission. So you got to be very specific in how that works, right? And how you collect the referral agreement. Make sense? Karina.
If you ask the other agent that for that particular property, you co-represent the buyer, so it's not just a referral. And then you can divulge the.
Absolutely. The question here is, can the agent that brought this property not co-list, but co-agent the transaction or co-represent the buyer? The answer is yeah, absolutely. If that agent is willing to do so.
So I guess I'm trying to clarify, like, where's the line, you know, because you said once we, you know, divulge the information. I'm assuming we're not giving the address when we're divulging that information to a group, right? We're
Right.
saying we have a property, you know, give the specs, the area.
Right.
So, you know, but I recall you said that, you know, we're not, if an agent says, okay, where's the address? We can't just say, no, we can give you that address. So I'm trying to understand, like, that's what's not clear for me. Where is that line where you say, you know, I'm happy.
Well, you gotta.
We have something signed, is that okay as far as our license is concerned, or?
Yeah.
You know, is it just flat out, no, it's not okay, obviously, but what are we okay to do? And we say, okay, I'm happy to give this to you once we have this signed. Then to me, almost, it's like, well, it's the same as no, so what are we okay to do?
Yeah, very good question. So how do you navigate that when you do have an agent that has someone that's interested in the property? Where is it where it may be kind of a fine line, right? And that can happen, right? Because you can't just say, no, I'm not going to provide you the address because you're a real estate agent. But you can have a conversation and say, look, the whole purpose of me promoting and trying to find a buyer for that sake is for me to represent. Now, if you're interested in this particular property, or your client may be, the only ask is that, you know, if I provide you with the address, that you at least pay me a referral on the successful closing. But that's also very convoluted, because let's just say that, you know, this agent tells another agent, right? And this agent says, look, I have an agreement, a referral, but if I pass it on to you, you close it. He doesn't have an agreement with you, and you can represent that buyer. So it shows, and that can happen. You know, there's so many angles, so many ways that you can twist this. And that's the problem when you have these type of situation. There is no good in it, right? Yes, there's a potential property. You may have a motivated seller, but there's really no good way to protect you. So the essence is, even if I ask for a referral, right? If that agent is savvy, what's to say that I don't pass it on to Bernice and Bernice closes out with this buyer? I had an agreement with you, but then ultimately the seller closes with this particular agent, which it's not what I have an agreement. Then I'm out of luck with any referral agreement, and that can happen. There's a lot of, I hate to say, a lot of agents that don't play by the rules. So you got to be careful, right? But this is where you want to start asking a lot of questions. Well, tell me a little bit more. You know, is this an area that your buyer is looking to purchase? You know, how soon? What's the qualification? You can ask all those questions. But remember, because you don't have a listing agreement in place, you're exposing yourself with a position of not collecting any type of compensation. And you have to be okay with this. Now, with that being said, the whole purpose of this form is that you are working with the buyer, you are working with the seller, and you're putting this deal together. But I'm also giving you that there may be also other angles that you may put yourself in a position that you may not collect compensation the minute that you start showcasing this as an off market. Because once it goes off market, you don't know who has eyes on it. Now, going back to your question about, well, how do I navigate? How do I articulate the conversation to compromise my position? Because I can't say no to an agent if they're asking about it, right? You can only ask, right? Well, the only avenue is, this is a property that I've been working with the seller, and if you are interested, or your client's interested, the only ask is that you pay me a referral because I'm trying to find a buyer for it. Right? You can't say, no, I'm not going to give you the address. The only way I'll do this if you give me the buyer and I help close and I'll pay you. You can't do that because now you're coercing and you're steering people, right? And that's a violation. Okay? So being very transparent in the very beginning is probably the best thing. Listen, I can divulge this information, but as soon as you provide me with a referral, okay? Because I don't have an agreement. I want to make a deal out of this and there's potential here. So if you want that, I have no problem, but I also want to be compensated for giving you a property you didn't even know about. You see where you're going with that?
It's a sign, it has to be signed and then
Yeah.
it's not just verbal.
Yeah. So on that referral, I would say be very detailed, very specific. That covers all bases, right? Because just being very vague may open up an opportunity for that agent to delegate or to pass it on to another agent, right? As the worst case scenario. Now we're hoping, right? We're hoping that all agents do the right thing, right? But let's just be honest with what it is. I'm only giving you these type of situations because it may happen. It may happen, right? All right, well, let's go ahead and continue. I hope that kind of answers your question or not. Maybe,
It does,
okay,
yeah, that's what it sounds like, it's okay, let me rephrase it to make sure I got it.
yeah,
So it's okay to say, I'll be happy to give you the address once we have the referral signed, as far as the closing place.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you only do that when there's another agent involved, right?
But I mean, again, it's just, it still sounds like if then, because if they don't sign it, then you're not giving them the address. So
That's perfectly fine. They wouldn't have known about this address. They wouldn't have known. Let's just be for what it is. You are giving someone an opportunity that you have an off-market property in this particular area. So in essence, yeah, you can shield that because they wouldn't have known of this, but also keep this in mind, right? As soon as you blast it out to anyone and everyone, that opens up opportunity to inquire. You're gonna get investors, you're gonna get agents inquiring about it too. You know,
the referral form, is it only for bringing buyers, or did you write it so that it's listing or buying?
you can do both. Yeah, on the referral agreement, yeah. On the referral agreement, you can put very specific because it has line items where you can put buyers, sellers, leases, and all that fun stuff. Okay, I don't know what happened. Let's go back. Anyone on Zoom have any questions? I'm not sure what happened here, so,
You just timed out, like
yeah. Well, they changed. The transaction. Now there's additional upgrades done to it, so I apologize. Let's go back again and access. Oh, gosh, that would really time me out. All right, guys, I sincerely apologize for this. So let me jump on it. But you see where I'm going with this agreement, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's not what I wanted. Here we go. And the rest of the stuff is just pretty self-explanatory. So you submit the single party compensation with the ultimate goal that the seller is going to pay you compensation. You're asking the seller to pay you, right? If you can bring a qualified buyer. And once you do, then and the seller accepts, right? The seller accepts your offer, then at the successful closing, of the transaction, then you're entitled to compensation. Okay. All right, let's go down here next.
Simon, where it says agency relationships, if you have to represent somebody, what is that third one?
Okay,
Other.
yeah. So,
I just don't understand why you necessarily need this. If on the purchase agreement, you have to represent somebody and you can write in a commission on the purchase agreement.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Or is this a belt and suspenders type of topic?
kind of. Yeah, it's kind of that. Because remember, with everything now, yeah, you don't necessarily have to utilize a single party compensation because you can submit an offer on behalf of a buyer, right?
Yeah.
Submit an offer. That offer states that you have a buyer representation agreement in place. Okay, but there's a section that says on G3, right, that says that you're asking the seller to pay you compensation, which you can go in that direction. The reason you want to use this is because this is a way that you can now ask for a type of representation agreement. Okay, so if you look at the agency relationship, okay, there's still an option, right? Broker will act as an agent for the principal exclusively in any resulting transaction. Broker will act as a dual agent, meaning you either represent one or both or none. And it's just crystal clear, in my opinion. Just like we were talking about, well, no one wants any representation, right? Obviously, there's no representation agreement, but there's still a disclosure. There is some type of agency duties. You still have to do the right thing, folks. You still have to do the right thing regardless, right? Because your license is on the hook. But it also gives them understanding and agrees that as a dual agent may not, without the express permission of the represented party, disclose to other party confidential information, including but not limited to the facts related to either the buyer or the seller's financial position. Okay, so it goes into that fine line, right? Because as challenging a dual agency, I don't recommend, especially for new agents, because there's just a lot of moving parts. Have that arm's length transaction, just represent one side and not both. And I get it, sometimes by representing both, there's a bigger commission, but there's bigger headaches too. Because the minute that either party says, you did not have my back or my best interest, that opens up an opportunity. It's like, oh, okay. And if they can articulate their position on why they feel that you did not represent them to the fullest, that can compromise your position and expose you to liability. Does that make sense? Okay. Number 3, broker will act as an agent for other parties exclusively in the resulting transaction. Principal agrees and understands that all acts of broker, even those that assist principal in performing or completing any principal contractual or legal obligation, are intended for the benefit of the other party exclusively. Principal is advised to seek real estate legal, tax, insurance, and all desired assistance from the appropriate professionals. This agreement does not require broker to solicit offers on the property from other property. Does it authorize broker to solicit offers from any other person or entity? Confirmation broker shall confirm that the agency relation described above or modified in writing prior to or concurrent with seller's execution of the purchase agreement. Potential competing sales, so it goes into the disclosures of the possible representation agreement, and then termination of agreement, right? Termination of agency relationship. Principal acknowledges and agrees that the representation duties of an agency relationship with broker terminate at the expiration of this agreement. So if the deal does not happen, right, or you cannot put the deal together, depending on what the amount that you put on the top here, right, then neither party is obligated to pay you compensation. That simple. Okay. Obviously, it goes into the benefits of using the MLS, opting out of the MLS. So, I mean, this is just, again, gives you just another layer that the ultimate goal is if you're going to be submitting an offer with a single party compensation agreement, the whole intent is let me just list the property. Let me have that agency protection that I will protect you. And the beautiful thing is you may expose more buyers or more eyes on your property, meaning I can get you more price, better terms and conditions than just trying to sell it to this individual. But the seller and the buyer may come to an agreement. No, 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 no. The seller can choose to sell it to whoever for whatever price they want. And I've seen that internal family deals, right? They'll sell it to a family member. I've seen where they sell it to the neighbor. I want to sell it to this specific neighbor. This is the price. It's like, you know that this price is lower than the market value. Yeah, but that was an agreement I had. I just want you to facilitate the paperwork. Okay. How do you protect yourself in that situation, right? Think about that. And that happens, and it happens quite often. You got a neighbor that wants to buy the property and they start the deal, but they want an agent to facilitate paperwork. How do you handle that? Well, one, the best way to protect yourself is obviously you're going to put language in there, right? You're going to put specific information says, you know, both mutually agree to a certain price based on my comparable properties. The property is valued a lot higher based on my, and put some ranges. Okay, because then they cannot come back to you saying you're the one that steered them to this price. The seller could have got more or the buyer could have got it less. It can go both ways, folks. So protect yourself by documenting your position. Because in front of attorneys and anyone looking at these agreements, they're going to see that you're in the chaos of the fire or you're neutral, but you divulge your layer of protection, right? That you warned them and says, look, my opinion is based on comparables. Here are the comparables in the last 90 days. Round the same square footage, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, 1,558 lot size, 1950s. Okay, this is what homes are selling for, right? Because I've seen like $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 differences, and the seller's perfectly fine to do so because that's their word. Okay, I caution you with those type of situations because it can come back. Yes.
Where exactly do you put that language?
You're gonna put that language in an addendum. So let's just say that it's no listing agreement. You don't have anything else, then you want to document it on an addendum. And that addendum says that both mutually agree to X price, but based on your comparable market analysis that you did, properties in this neighborhood within a half-mile radius of the subject property are ranging from this price to this price.
So does that apply for the site representation? Or is my first question was like fix and flips. It's a given, whatever it's.
This is a whole different parameter. Yeah, when you're talking fix and flip, you know, I buy properties all the time. And what I do to protect myself, I let the seller know, look, I'm buying this property below market value with the intent to renovate it for the purpose of selling it for a higher price to make a profit. And I put that in writing. I either on an addendum or in the purchase agreement somewhere on additional terms, I put that language in there because I want to make sure that the seller is crystal clear that my intention is to buy it for less. I'm going to take the risk of buying a house that is in really bad condition. Based on my analysis, this is what I'm looking for. If you like it, great. If you don't, that's okay. I'll walk away. You don't have to sell it to me. But I don't want to be in a position where they feel that I took advantage of the circumstances. So I'm going to be clear on what that looks like. I'm going to put it in writing. Yes, I'm buying it below market value because I am. Yes, I'm going to renovate this home. Yes, I'm going to sell it. And yes, I'm going to sell it because the intent is to make a profit. Okay, well, some people may disagree with me. Okay, but these are the individuals that get caught red-handed and now they're backpedaling. And, you know, you're an expert, you know the market, you're licensed, you should know more, you want to protect yourself. So in those circumstances, it's the same thing. I'm just saying here, Karina, that it's a situation where a neighbor is trying to sell it to another neighbor. They already made this agreement. How do you protect? You're not involved in the transaction per se that you're not buying the property or selling the property. I'm saying you protect yourself because that's the agreement they have together. Does that make sense? Okay. It's done. Again, this is just goes into the benefits of obviously putting it on the MLS. They would sign MLS images, equal housing opportunities. So it has a lot of the same information that the purchase agreement and listing agreement has. Mediation terms, I'm not going to go into it, but again, if there's a dispute, obviously you want to escalate it into a mediation before you go into an arbitration and before you try to sue one another, right? Because again, here on other terms, right, you can put all kinds of jargon. You can put 30 paragraphs. It'll pick up all 30 paragraphs and it'll include a supplement to it. Okay. So don't think that because it only has 4 lines, it's not. You can also attach an addendum to it as well. So that way there's additional protection. If it's a trust and all that, it goes into a legal authorized signers who are the ones that are actually, it has to be the seller. It has to be the buyers that are buying the entities. If it's a corporation, LLC, probate, partnership, then the information goes in there. Then they agree to it. You submit it with the offer. Obviously, there's no discriminatorial. So this is basically, you know, that form, which is again on the purchase agreement and listing agreement as well. Okay. Any questions regarding today's class? Okay.
Hey, Simon,
Yes.
I know last month's topic was leases, but I have a question on deposits.
Say again.
I said I have a question on security deposits on leases.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sure you've seen the homes that just in PV that just had the backyard slide down the bluff.
Uh-huh.
And one of them was just leased in June for $20,000 a month. They originally asked about $25,000 a month with a $75,000 security deposit. So according to California law last year, they only limited to 1 month, possibly 2 with exemptions. So by them asking more than 3 months rent as a deposit, is that a possible violation or am I missing something?
It is a possible violation, and it's something that you can definitely file complaint. That to me sounds like it's a price gouging, regardless of you know what transpired in early 2025, right, with the fires and everything. Yeah, I can say that it seems like it is a violation. So you are the consumer, whoever can file an investigation. And you know, when this was hot topic and consumers were doubling, tripling up on the rental income, you know, we were getting letters from the state, from the county, even from the city. Hey, we noticed that you had it listed at this price for 8,000 and now you're asking 14,000. You know, that seems to be like price gouging, you know, especially with the increase of deposit and all that. Yeah, that's will start an internal invest. I haven't seen that many letters come anymore, but in the beginning of March, April, May, June, we were definitely getting those letters. So yeah, I think that is considered a violation.
Okay, I was just concerned maybe I might be misinterpreting the law or missing something.
Sure, absolutely. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone here. Have a great afternoon. Be safe. Have a fantastic weekend. It's October. And just a reminder, next Friday, it'll be back to 10:30 in the morning instead of 1 p.m. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Simon, when you do your, do you represent yourself